Welcome to SynerG Coaching and Wellness Warrior in a Garden podcast. Today's topic of discussion is going to be the Yi Jin Jing, and it's going to be a relatively complete discussion on what the entire practice looks like. But I want to start out by saying that if there was a method of practice that would lead to maximum longevity and maximum youthfulness and strength and vitality and wellness as you went along your journey, the practice of the Yi Jin Jing would be that singular practice. So as we look at what the Yi Jin Jing is, and it's going to be a lengthy discussion, I apologize in advance for this being a relatively long podcast, but stick with it. There's a lot of information in this, and there's a lot of methodology that we're going to talk about that will give you some guidance on what the Yi Jin Jing actually is and how you can incorporate it into your longevity strategy and your daily practice on reaching that goal of longevity. So let's dive in and let's talk about a little bit of the history and the context of what the Yi Jin Jing actually is. So the Yi Jin Jing it's what the Chinese refer to as a classic. So it's twofold in that. Number one, it is a document in and of itself. Okay, so it's you could call it a book, or it's written literature about what this practice is and how you go about the practice. And it's also passed down from teacher to teacher to teacher to student and so forth. And it's very old. Where it came from exactly, it honestly, it depends on who you're talking to. If you're talking to, Shaolin enthusiasts, which was my initial foray into the Yi Jin Jing was through my Shaolin practice. It has a history, and I'm going to dive into that a little bit. But it also has a Taoist background as well, and the Taoists kind of took it and really built the internal aspects of what the Yi Jin Jing is. So I'll tell you a little bit, backing up to the Shaolin. This is the history that was taught to me when I first started learning about the Yi Jin Jing. And it was a story about Damo, who was an Indian monk who made his way to China and came upon one of the Shaolin temples, and found the monks. They were very deep into meditation, at these Buddhist temples, which that's what Shaolin temples were. They were Buddhist temples. So they're very deep into meditation. But at this point in history, they were not so much into any type of physical practice or any type of practice that developed strength and wellness and vitality. So when he came upon these monks, he found that they were weak due to far too much meditation and didn't have nearly the vitality they needed to survive. Okay, so they're basically on their own in the wild, and they had wild animals. They needed to produce food for themselves, whether it be through agriculture or hunting or however they chose to feed themselves. But these monks were basically, because of the advanced meditation they were doing and the lack of physical structure to their being, they were just too weak to really survive. So he introduced the 49 postures of Yi Jin Jing, which was the first thing that I learned pertaining to Yi Jin Jing practice. And it was basically what we'll refer to as a Wei-Dan practice. So it was very external in nature. Okay, and I know that's the Yi Jin Jing itself is more of an internal practice, and we'll dive deeply into that here in just a few minutes. But so the initial foray into this for me and for supposedly the Shaolin history of it was the development of these 49 postures that Damo taught the monks. And there was a lot of stretching, and there's a lot of opening up of joints, and there was a lot of just physical practice. But it seemed, now that we look at what the full context of the Yi Jin Jing is, it's probably more preparatory than it was actual Yi Jin Jing work. So at that point, they developed these physical attributes. They began working with martial arts, and the monks then also began doing some Dao Yin practice, which is like a Qigong work. And we'll do a podcast on this to really differentiate between Qigong and Dao Yin work, and even maybe even throw Neidan and Neigong work into that, so that we can understand what the subtle differences are within those practices. But they were doing also some Dao Yin practices that were introduced to the temples at the time. And what they discovered as they developed the true Yi Jin Jing practice was that they found a way of building a strong body, as well as creating a pathway to really high personal cultivation and wellness. So that's the foundation of the Yi Jin Jing. And I will tell you that the Yi Jin Jing is the foundation of our practice, whether it be through our Jade Dragon School of martial arts and Neigong work and internal work, or it's even a very critical part of our 5 pillars practice in SynerG Coaching and Wellness. So, and we've talked about the 5 pillars at length in some of our other discussions. So pillar 3, efficient body, and pillar 5, internal energy and Qi, are the 2 primary pillars that the Yi Jin Jing will have a huge impact on. So pillar 3 is efficient body. Obviously, that's a practice that the Yi Jin Jing wants to work on. But it also helps with the building of Qi and the internal energy that we talk about and discuss in our pillar 5 discussions. So when we look at the Yi Jin Jing, how does this work? It seems like with everything that you can accomplish through the practice of Yi Jin Jing, it is like the ultimate elixir to wellness and to longevity. If you're deep into the practice of the Yi Jin Jing and you've accomplished the qualities that you develop, we'll talk about how everything that we do internally is more built upon qualities than it is on anything that's mystical or esoteric. The Taoist approach to internal work is very pragmatic in nature. But when we talk about and look at how this practice works, how does it unfold, what are the steps that are required as we go through this practice, you will find that it varies from teacher to teacher, from school to school, from tradition to tradition. And it's interesting because I've got multiple teachers in my background, and my first foray was, like we had discussed before, my first foray was into the Shaolin tradition. And their vision of the Yi Jin Jing was very hard practice, very physical practice, what we would call hard Qigong, or more appropriately, Huidan work. And we'll talk a little bit about Huidan versus Neidan work here in just a few minutes. But my initial practice was heavily invested into hard Qigong work. As I developed and started branching out, and I kind of left my Shaolin tradition and left that more strictly towards my martial arts side of things, when I started seeking out more information internally, I was introduced to a different pathway on the Yi Jin Jing, which is what I ascribe to as the most valuable pathway now. It takes a little bit longer to develop, and we'll talk about all of that here in just a few minutes. But anyway, so that is more of a Taoist practice that I adhere to now when it comes to the Yi Jin Jing, and it doesn't focus so much on any type of external work. It focuses almost primarily on internal work, and the Qi leads all of your development. And we'll talk about that here in just a minute. When we talked about the two aspects in the process, we talked about Hui Dan and we talked about the Nei Dan practice. And really, if we're going to simplify that, it basically means Hui Dan is external elixir. Okay, that's what it means. And the purpose of Hui Dan is to strengthen the external body, skin, muscles, tendons, fascia, bone, and basically it works outside in. Okay. And I still use Hui Dan work as a preparatory exercise and preparatory work for the deeper practice. And we'll talk about some mistakes that people can make within the Yi Jin Jing process here in just a little bit. And as we teach the Hui Dan side of it, we need to be cautious not to make one of those mistakes. And we'll talk about that here in just a little bit. Nei Dan is literally the internal elixir. So its purpose is to basically mobilize and build qi. And it creates efficiencies within the body for qi to move about, and it opens the body for qi to happen. So this practice works inside out, and this is our focus, as this is likely the true Yi Jin Jing work in terms of what the classic stated. So there are a couple of important things to know as we begin this discussion and as we dive into the deeper practice of the Yi Jin Jing. First, and this is really critical because there's a lot of information out there about Yi Jin Jing that is probably, I won't go so far as to say that it's false, I'll just say that it's incomplete. The Yi Jin Jing is not a single Qigong set. Okay? If you Google Yi Jin Jing, or if you go to YouTube and you type in Yi Jin Jing in the search bar, it'll populate with a lot of this same practice, and I think it's 13 postures that you practice on a Qigong set. Hey, and it's a nice set. I teach it. Okay, but it is not the Yi Jin Jing, and it's not even capable of leading you to the higher levels of Yi Jin Jing work, because it's more of a preparatory type Qigong set. It's very nice for stretching. It definitely will increase vitality. It's a very good exercise. But at the deeper levels, it won't get you where you want to go within the Yi Jin Jing, the true Yi Jin Jing practice, because the true Yi Jin Jing practice is a little bit deeper. And you'll understand that as this video goes on, and I outline specifically how the qualities of the body need to be developed. So what is the Yi Jin Jing? So the purpose of the Yi Jin Jing is to develop the tissues and structure of the body to create clear energetic pathways. And when we talk about energetic pathways, we're not talking about meridians in the traditional Chinese medicine sense. We're talking about more of the channel system, which is the Jing Jin system is what it's actually called. And it's the primary focus of the Yi Jin Jing practice. Yi Jin Jing requires transformation of the sinews and the musculature of the body, and it requires lengthening and opening of your tendon structure as well as your skeletal structure. So this opening and stretching and releasing of musculature and of the skeletal structure allows for qi to move in, and we'll dive into that here in depth in just a few minutes. One of the primary purposes is to regain, increase physical vitality. It increases your blood flow. It minimizes stress and anxiety. And actually, even if you don't achieve the highest levels of Yi Jin Jing, the practice of Yi Jin Jing can accomplish all of these for you. It definitely will increase physical vitality. It'll increase your blood flow. It'll minimize your stress and anxiety. So it's very helpful in those regards, even if you don't take the full journey of the Yi Jin Jing practice. The goal is to open the body for more efficient qi flow. This is opening the channels, and it's really opening and elongating tissue within the body, and we'll talk about that here shortly as well. You will work toward accumulating and strengthening your qi, and ultimately it will lead to the ability for you to practice the Shi Shui Jing, which is the marrow cleansing classic, and that's another thing that you'll see online a lot. You'll see where they have like these Qigong sets that are basically, they'll call it the marrow washing classic, and it's just not. It's just a Qigong set that it will certainly make you feel better to do it, but at the deeper level of the marrow washing, the marrow cleansing classic, it's completely inadequate. But again, it's a nice Qigong set, and it does have value. I'm not taking away the value of what those sets are, but the marrow cleansing classic is much deeper, and you cannot effectively practice the marrow washing classic without having developed very specific qualities within the Yi Jin Jing in order to progress and practice the marrow cleansing classic. So the marrow cleansing classic is basically, transforming the mind, enlightenment, and working towards those things. But it's different than that too, on a very practical level for those of us that live day to day, and aren't esoteric and live in the real world. It creates mental clarity at a level that it's really hard to explain in a video. You just have to go through it. There's a level of clear-mindedness that comes with this practice that you honestly would have to experience to fully appreciate. But just know that it creates an awful lot of mental clarity within the person. So let's talk a little bit about a couple of things we need to understand about the process and how it works. And we're going to start out with the various layers of the body, because you need to understand these to understand when we start talking about how we're going to open these up and we're going to stretch and create space and place for qi to move, this internal energy to move. There are several layers of the body that should be addressed in the practice. So we'll start with muscles. And when we talk about muscles, we're not talking about necessarily fascia. Okay, and for those of you that don't know what the difference between fascia and like the major muscle groups, fascia would be more of like the sheets of musculature that you have within the abdominal area and some other areas of the body. That typically would be grouped more with the Jing Jian and the Huang when we get to the discussion of the Huang. But when we talk about muscles, we're talking primarily about your biceps and the larger muscle groups, your shoulders, and we're going to talk about like true like muscles when you think about bodybuilders and things like that. We're going to talk about tendons. Tendons would be the next layer, and tendons are basically your connective tissue. Okay, so we know what tendon is. It's the part that the muscle dives into the tendons, which connect muscle to bone. I've mentioned Jing Jin, and so basically when we talk about the Jing Jin, that is a system within the body of sinew channels. And like I mentioned before, it is not in the traditional Chinese medicine tradition. It's more broad than that, and it doesn't deal with specific meridians as much as it deals with areas. Okay, so when we talk about the Jing Jin, we're going to be talking about areas of the body that are channels within the body itself. The Wang is, and I'd mentioned the Wang before, it is basically the space between. It's the space between organs, it's the space between tissue. When we think about the Wang, when we think about our organs, okay, how do they suspend themselves within, within our abdomen region? Why don't they just collapse down? Well, the area that's in between those organs that kind of uplifts and holds those things into place would be Wang. There's space between muscles, like your individual musculature fibers, within the tendons and the separation of the tendons. There's space between, and that space between is how we basically define the Wang. Bones, obviously bones are a layer of the body, and bones are really important because bones hold up our structure. And what we're going to talk about here in just a few minutes is how critical is that our structure is in place when we do this practice and when we do all Qigong work. And if we do internal martial arts, our structure is critically important. And we'll talk about how the bones holding up their structure, and then we relax the muscle off the bone. We'll have that discussion here in just a few minutes. And then we've got the viscera, and those are basically your organs. When we talk about the viscera, we talk about organs. And, the channels, it's critically important for our energetic channels to be open in order for our organs to be fully efficient and fully healthy. So we'll dive into that part of the discussion as well. So as we begin our deeper dive into the Yi Jin Jing and our methodologies that we're going to utilize to develop the qualities required for the Yi Jin Jing practice, I want to begin with some developmental errors. And there are basically three major developmental errors that people make. And first, we're going to look at a focus on muscles. Okay, so we look at, if your developmental focus is on building muscle, it will not sustain over time. If we look at, even in our SynerG Coaching discussions, as we discussed Pillar 1, one of the primary things we want to guard against over time is the loss of muscle mass, because that's a naturally occurring phenomena that our body goes through. So one of the things we truly work against is the inevitable loss of muscle mass. And that's going to happen. And this focus on developing muscle over time, it will not sustain itself in the longest possible sense. The Yi Jin Jing will certainly help with that. And people that focus on muscles develop what's known as SynerG. That's the Chinese term for it. And basically what that means is a dispersal of skill. But it means that as we age, we have difficulty with our musculature and our ability to move and to be efficient within our bodily movement. The Yi Jin Jing battles against that, and the practice of Yi Jin Jing and the utilization of Qi, as you'll see as we get deeper into the discussion, goes much farther in helping that loss of muscle than just a comprehensive look at a focus on muscle. So when we look at the focus on muscle, we're talking about things like, lifting weights and other hard physical activities that develop musculature. And that's important work, okay? We talk about this type of work at length because it's critical. I mean, you have to have strength, and you want to continue to build that. This is not saying don't go lift weights anymore because it's not effective. It's absolutely effective. We don't want to give that up. But there's a practice that you can set alongside that work that will be more effective from a longevity perspective, and that's practicing the Yi Jin Jing and doing some of the work that helps develop the qualities of the Yi Jin Jing. Most weight on practices, we had talked about weight on before, that was my initial foray into the practice of the Yi Jin Jing. And, that's hard Qigong work. It's tension, it's striking, it's, that type of work. Oh, it's also like really hard stretching. So like if you go to ineffective yoga classes to where their focus is on really hard stretching, that's a form of weight on work, and it's more of a focus on muscles as well, and not a focus on sustainable work. So those are some examples of focus on muscle. The next area is a focus on the tendons. So when we talk about tendons, we're talking about stretching work without a focus on opening channels, the Jing Jin channels that we had talked about previously. Again, this is mostly weight on work that really focuses on tension and especially on hard physical stretching of the body to try and lengthen and stretch tendons and musculature and that type of work. And the third developmental error is kind of an odd one. And for those of you that aren't in the martial arts world or in the internal arts world, it's a focus on Huang. And so, you'll mostly see this like if you've ever seen like drunken kung fu, to where the body's incredibly relaxed and it's almost like noodly is the best way to explain it. But it's basically dancing. Some dancing would be a practice that would be more of a focus on Huang. It's loose. It's Qigong practice. It's movement practice without adequate structure. Okay, is the best way to explain it. And basically, this ultimately leads to a lack of power and a low level of vitality. Okay, so this type of work is definitely limiting in those terms. And sadly, when we look across the structure of modern Qigong work, and you'll hear me a lot of times. I try really hard not to be critical of how people practice or what gets practiced. And the only time that I really bring up specific things is if it's unsafe or if for some reason it flies in the face of what traditionally is held to be true. And when we look at modern Qigong work, especially Qigong work that is practiced by like the New Age movement and some of these people that are looking for more of a mental clarity type purpose, it completely lacks structure, and it's very loose and it's very noodly, and it doesn't build any vitality and it doesn't build any strength whatsoever. And so you can drill this down to the fact that no structure yields no power, and it yields little improvement in vitality. So, focus on the Wang is probably the last developmental error that you could look at. So, now that we know what not to do, what are some of the rules for the practice of Yi Jin Jing, and how do we build the body to eliminate the errors that we just talked about? And the answer to that is simple and yet complicated at the same time. And the answer is we build with Qi. And, Qi may seem like an esoteric concept to some of you guys that are listening to this. It's not. Okay, Qi is it's internal energy, maybe a little bit deeper than that, but for the sake of discussion and for the sake of practice and for what we want to accomplish for those that are watching this video, internal energy is fine. We'll move forward with that. And Qi is the foundation of the Yi Jin Jing practice. So there are some rules that need to be followed. And first and foremost of that is physical and mental health must be based in Qi. Okay, so, how do we use the Qi to develop this health? How do we utilize this internal energy? How do we use what's inside of us to develop this high level of health that we're all trying to achieve? And the answer to that question is proper practice in Qigong. And we'll come full circle on this discussion here in just a few minutes. But Qigong is the answer to that question. So the next rule is that the physical must follow the intangible. The body must change because of the Qi. So how does it do that? And we'll probably dive into that a little bit deeper. But as the Qi begins to move through the body changes in order for the Qi to become even more effective and more efficient in its practice. The Qi must transform the Huang and then the tendons. So when we talk about tendons, the ultimate purpose is to create tendon-like qualities within our musculature. So the easiest way on video is to show it here. If you feel your tendon here, you feel like it's like an individual sinew, an individual tendon. You can feel it, you can pluck it. As you develop and you go through the Yi Jin Jing process, you'll find that your musculature begins to have similar qualities within it, to where you can differentiate, your muscle tissue in the same way. And then finally, you need to learn to mobilize the Qi, and the Qi will help then build the Huang. It becomes circular. But you must build an effective base of Qi and a quantity of Qi. And in our practice, we typically do it through a lot of Dantian work, Dantian Gong work, to where we can focus the Qi into the Dantian, and then we'll drag it around the body as we begin to practice more and develop more of those types of qualities. But you can't do that work without having the body developed properly and the channel pathways open so that the Qi can be pulled. So there's a very specific process that gets followed when you're doing true Qigong work. And that's our goal, and that's the purpose of the Yi Jin Jing, is so that we want the body to be built and to be improved and efficient. And we're going to talk a little bit about how to make that happen, so that we can build this Qi, we can consolidate this Qi, and then we can drag this Qi around the body to maximize our health and wellness. So I've kind of opened the door into how the Yi Jin Jing actually works. So now we're going to drill down a little bit and talk about it at length. So we mentioned before that we build the qualities of Yi Jin Jing through Qigong practice. And so as I outline my methodology with my students, my process is going to be different from like true Shaolin practitioners, because that was my initial foundation, but my practice in Shaolin lacked depth. Now I practice, all of my internal work is basically from a Taoist tradition. And for most people, I find that the Taoist tradition requires you to be at a certain spot developmentally and quality-wise that a lot of people don't have. So, I think that it's probably wise to do a little bit of initial work to get the body ready and to get yourself mentally ready to do the Yi Jin Jing work. And what I typically find is that we talked about the Yi Jin Jing Qigong set earlier, which is ineffective long-term because it's not going to help you develop the deeper internal qualities that are required for the true Yi Jin Jing practice. But it's a great place to start. I mean, I use it for, helping people develop initially the body and the framework to practice the Yi Jin Jing classic. We'll use Baduan Jin. I think Baduan Jin is also a really nice developmental Qigong set, but it can only take you so far. So my process with my students with Yi Jin Jing is a little bit of both. We utilize some weight on stuff early on to help get the body ready for the practice and to help build the structure that we talked about being so critical before we get into what the true Yi Jin Jing work is, which is mostly my Taoist work. So as we get, after we've developed an adequate foundation, whether we've done some Qigong work with structure, whether that be the Yi Jin Jing 13 posture set that I teach, or the Baduan Jin, or there are multiple other Qigong sets that you can do to help position yourself and prepare yourself for the deeper levels of work. So once we've got a proper foundation to begin this work, we start diving into how do we open up the body, how do we develop space, how do we create this efficiency within the body, how do we open the channel system. It's a process. So the first thing we want to do is we want to talk about our structure. And when we're doing this work, we want to create space and develop the Huang through this proper body development. So what does that look like? What does that mean? My students will hear me tell them this all the time. Muscles must hang off of the bone. Okay? In order for the musculature to lengthen and to relax, to create space. So, okay, when I talk about relaxing, I'm talking about relaxing in a little bit different way. So you'll hear a lot of internal teachers, like especially Tai Chi teachers, talk about bones up, flesh down. That's probably what most people will say. And basically what that means is that you hold your structure, okay, And then as you hold the structure, you release the musculature. And the musculature literally feels like it hangs off of the bone. And as that muscle hangs off the bone, all right, so this is my bone, okay? Let's see if I can do this in the best way. All right, and this is my muscle that rides underneath it. As it hangs, that little bit of hang creates space, this space right here between the muscle and the bone. Well, so that is where the wang will fill in, okay? And that's when we talk about the muscle must hang off the bone, it lengthens and relaxes, and then the wang fills in that space. So that's critically important. And that's like one of the first steps that we talk about. And as the wang fills that space, the wang will allow for qi to flow in. When we talk about structure, you know, we want to stay away from the bones laying on each other. So when I teach a Qigong posture, or if I'm teaching somebody a standing or seated meditation, I'll talk about, you know, like you want to hang the back of your head on a meat hook, and you want to feel the body lengthen and stretch. As the bones lengthen and stretch, it creates space. So where we create this space is a place where the wang can fill in, and where the wang fills in, qi can flow, and it creates efficiency within the body. And anytime we look at that concept of bones up, flesh down, it creates space for the wang to fill. You know, a good way to talk about bones is the bones have to float. You know, I've heard that said before, and I think that's a pretty good way of explaining the concept of what you want to look for. So it can be like pillar practice or anything, you want the bones to float, and you want to create space between the joints. But you don't want to stretch it out like this. You just want to relax it and let that space create itself. It takes a good bit of mindfulness to practice this. And early on it seems difficult, but once you've done the practice for a while, and it takes time. It takes time for this practice to really catch hold. But any of that type of relaxation creates the space required for wang to fill and for qi to fill in those spaces. And then ultimately, it creates a very connected body. So as the wang fills in, it's like, and the channels open, the body becomes connected, completely connected. So we just talked about creating space, and once that space is created, the wang fills in, and then once the wang fills in, it creates the opportunity for growth and for strengthening of the tissue and the bone, for that matter. But it will not, or it should not, flow into the muscle. It needs to flow into the space. So if the wang flows into the muscle, your muscles are going to grow and get big. You'll have some hypertrophy for that, which is a bonus, but it will create contractive strength. And contractive strength works against the idea of elongating and opening the body. So from the Yi Jin Jing perspective, we want to minimize that contractive strength. And so we want to create space within the musculature, like we talked about just a few minutes ago, to where the muscles hang and the space around the muscle gets filled with the wang and not the muscle itself. If the wang fills around the muscle, you get what's more of an elasticated strength, okay? And it's much more vital that way. So, as we create this space, and as we, as the Huang builds, the more it will develop Qi. So, and this becomes kind of a cyclical process, right? So if the Huang helps develop and build Qi, and then we're creating a storehouse for the Qi, and then we can circulate that Qi back out, okay? And most of this work will circulate through the Dantian. That's a very basic thought process on it. As you practice for years, it becomes a little bit different. But that's a good starting point. As we build this and we begin to get this circulation process, and it's not as complicated or as esoteric as it sounds. It's simply the development of these qualities. It's simply the development and the creation of this space within the musculature, and within the tendon system itself, that, the Qi's going to fill that space. The Huang's going to fill that space, and the Qi's going to flow into the Huang. And as this happens, the body fills out and it pressurizes. So this pressurization will then help stretch open the sinews, which will help develop the muscles into this tendon type quality that I was talking about just a few minutes ago. And at this point, you'll find that your body is open and connected, and Qi can move freely through the channel systems. And once you reach this level once you develop these qualities, you're pretty much there. You'll find that you'll have incredibly improved physical and mental health. You're going to find that your body becomes not just strong, but very, very strong. And not weightlifting type strong, but very functionally strong. Your vitality is going to be through the roof. You're going to have, your body is going to be dynamic and springy. Probably the best way to explain the strength that you'll develop will be similar to bamboo. Bamboo is incredibly flexible, and it has the ability to bend and wave, but it's also incredibly strong, and it does not lack any level of support at all. So that's kind of that's the best analogy that I can think of in terms of what your body and structure will feel like as you go through years of this Yi Jin Jing practice. And then you'll find that you have an abundance of Qi, which is certainly beneficial on a lot of different levels. And it opens up a pathway to deeper practices at that point. So before I move on to what opens up to practitioners of these types of arts once you've developed the qualities outlined in the Yi Jin Jing, I want to say this again, and I preach this all the time. My students probably get tired of hearing it, but what we do seems to be esoteric. It seems to be mystical. It seems to be beyond rational comprehension. When we start talking about things like Qi, Qi naturally kind of maybe even seems a little bit off-putting to some people because they don't understand it, and or because it's been presented in some way that it's mystical. It's none of these things. It is none of these things. This practice is very pragmatic, and it's built in a very pragmatic way. It's built by developing qualities within our body that allow for us to do the next thing. Okay? So as we develop these qualities over time, we kind of unlock our body's own potential. That's the best way to explain internal work. It's not mystical. It's something that exists within all of us. So that being said, it's not anybody can do this work. Okay, it's available to anybody, and it certainly has huge benefits because it will take you to the highest levels of vitality and wellness that you can even probably comprehend at this point. So regardless of where you are, when you begin, you're going to begin gaining the benefits of this practice immediately. And persistence in this practice will ultimately lead to your greatest success. So that being said, what comes after? And I'm not going to dive too deeply into this today because this will be for another discussion altogether. We talked about what comes next. Once you've developed, let me back up for just a minute. How long does it take to develop the qualities of the Yi Jin Jing? Well, so that's kind of an open-ended question, and it's one that's kind of hard to answer because it's going to depend on you. I typically answer this question by saying it will take a minimum of a year. And when I say a minimum, I mean a minimum, because the minimum is for people who have a reasonably strong foundation of the work. For most people, it will take a couple of years. But you will improve and gain benefits throughout the entire journey. So don't let the length of time that, when I talk about a couple of years, don't let that dissuade you. Dive right in and get started, because your vitality and your wellness and your strength and your lack of anxiety and stress will begin immediately. So it's valuable work regardless of where you are on the journey. So anyway, your current level of attainment when you start matters. Your overall health and vitality at the start matters. If you're a lifelong athlete, you're probably going to have a little bit better structure and beginning point than someone who's led a sedentary existence. I mean, it's just the nature of the beast. And you probably have to lead a little bit of a cleaner life in order to gain maximum benefits of this. Are you willing to do that? And then how much time can you commit to practice? It takes practice. A little bit of practice every day. It's not... most of the work that we do on developing the Yi Jin Jing qualities doesn't require as much recovery as weightlifting or going out and riding, 50 miles on a bike or something like that. The recovery, it doesn't require that same type of recovery that you would normally expect from exercise, strenuous exercise. Having a proper teacher is helpful for sure. We talk about a lot of these things through our SynerG Academy, and we're rolling out more and more courses online that you can learn from. It's always good to have access to a teacher, though, somebody that can answer your questions and kind of help get you through some sticking points. But yeah, so that basically, I didn't really talk about where you can go from here once you develop those qualities. We had talked about the marrow washing classic. That's a further practice. Once you've opened up your channel system, a lot of the Qigong work that works specifically, like 5 elements work, and specific work on specific organs works better. There's a lot of Qigong work that works better, and your internal martial arts has to be connected in the same way that the Yi Jin Jing requires. So when you see somebody that does Tai Chi their body is connected, and they utilize internal energies that require the body to be connected. Like when they release in the pung movements, those movements need to be connected internally. And it's hard to release like that if your body's not open and you haven't developed some of these qualities of the Yi Jin Jing. Bagua specifically that way for sure on a lot of different deeper levels. Most people that do Bagua honestly are doing an internal practice externally. There are very few people that actually do Bagua properly. So anyway, that's basically it. That's I know this has been a long podcast, and I apologize for that. But this is a really important practice. The Yi Jin Jing is the foundation of what we do. And if you've developed the qualities of the Yi Jin Jing, you will lead an incredible life of vitality and wellness. And it's a vitality and wellness that you can take long into as you get older and older and older. It will stay with you, and it's a continued practice that will serve you well. And it's a major piece of our longevity practice at SynerG Coaching. So, at any rate, I appreciate you guys staying with me through this podcast, this video podcast. And as always, if you have any questions, please reach out to me. You can contact me directly through my website, SynerG Coaching, or you can email me directly at that email address. And I try and get back with everybody that emails me or reaches out through the website within 24 hours. So that's always my goal. So at any rate, appreciate you spending some time with us today. And as always, have a great day.